Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. We are going to be talking today about American life in the late 1980s and 1990s, the end of the Cold War, and sort of the ideological consensus that emerges at that time. Reagan, Bush, Clinton, the dot-com boom, and all that stuff. Anyway, so the title of today's episode is Welcome to the New World Order. I hope you like it, because you better make yourself comfortable. Pull up a seat. Okay, so we talked about how Reagan came to power in 1980, in large part because the failures of the Carter administration, the economic crises of the 1970s, and Reagan really brought the ideas of the new right, the new evangelical, moral majority movement, and the intellectual right, this idea of the free market, traditionalism, and a very aggressive foreign policy to power in 1980. And he was, I would say it's hard to say he was not successful. The economy kind of came back in the early 1980s, at least in terms of unemployment going down, inflation going down, the economy growing. Reagan won just landslide, huge, gigantic re-election victory in 1984 against someone, I can't remember who it is. This was the era of conservatism sort of being ascendant, and we talked about it last time in terms of Gordon Gekko, the character from the film Wall Street, who said greed is good, greed works, greed clarifies. That was really the ethos of the age. Let the free market, let people make money, let people be greedy, and that will drive the economy. This is the motive force of society. So why not just let it go? And so Wall Street is sort of the symbol of that. But this also applies to all the other parts of the economy that are deregulated, and Silicon Valley, in fact, is coming to the fore at this time. So we're going to talk about how we get to that and then into Clinton. What you need to know is that Reagan was president until 1989. George H.W. Bush ran for president in 1988. He was Reagan's vice president. And at first, it really didn't seem like he would do that well. He wasn't a very charismatic person. And people had had 2 terms of the Republican Party, and it's very hard for a party to hold on to power for more than 2 terms. But George H.W. Bush did succeed. He defeated his opponent, Michael Dukakis, who had been the governor of Massachusetts, in a pretty convincing victory. If you watch the Willie Horton ad, you'll have a certain idea of not only why Bush won, but what was going on in American society at the time. We talked about, the rather large wave of violent crime that was happening in the 1980s. We talked about the crack epidemic, and there were a lot of fears around the idea of danger, crime. And Bush's campaign capitalized on that and put it in an incredibly racist form. Be afraid of these people. They're going to come to your house and rape and kill you. Vote for me. It is very similar to the Daisy ad that we talked about with LBJ. Anyway, Bush becomes president. We go into a recession in the early 90s. Bush seemed like he was a very formidable opponent or president. He seemed like he was being successful, but there was this recession, and you also have this person that I like to call Bill Clinton, who comes along. I'll be perfectly honest, not my favorite person in the world. It's just a parenthetical editorial comment there, but you have this, youngish man, who was a governor of Arkansas. He was a Democrat, and he represented what was called the New Democrats. They were advocating the idea that we need to be a little more conservative, we need to be a little more to the center, we need to accept the verdict of Reaganism, that like the free market, small government, deregulation, like we need to accept that that is what has happened and now like adjust to it. Very similar pattern happened in the UK, where Tony Blair was the Labour Prime Minister who was elected in 1997. Um, he was doing basically the same thing, saying like, look, the Labour Party, which is sort of their equivalent of the Democratic Party, needs to just acknowledge that Margaret Thatcher and the Conservative Revolution happened and like accommodate that. So Clinton comes along and he actually does really well. I mean, he exploits the weaknesses of George H.W. Bush and is able to win a victory. It's actually really in 1992. It's a very interesting map. I've been showing you guys like electoral college maps. This is very interesting because Clinton wins a convincing victory, but he also, I mean, he's winning Arkansas, Louisiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, states that today would be surprising if a Democratic candidate won. So Clinton was able to pull together this constituency of sort of Southerners, moderate Democrats, and with the idea of not being too left-wing. So Clinton comes into office. His real thing is trying to change healthcare, and that is a disaster. The one thing, I mean, Clinton was trying to be more moderate or conservative relative to his predecessors, who were giant losers. But the one thing Clinton was trying to do is to create universal health care. Bill Clinton and his wife Hillary Clinton were just kind of like, they said two for the price of one. They were kind of a team. And Bill put Hillary in charge of this effort to reform health care. The idea was, we're going to take this insane, bizarre, weird patchwork of a system that we have where, some people have health care and some people don't, and we're going to replace it with something universal, like everyone will have health care, something more similar to what you find in the countries of Western Europe. So, Clinton pursues this. He's got big margins in Congress for his own party, the Democrats. People are not happy with the healthcare system, so it seems like there's a great prospect for this happening, but it completely crashes and burns. The conservative Democrats were not really willing to support the idea. The medical industry really came out hard against it. They put on this ad, which I love, after Daisy, Willie Horton, now Harry and Louise. One of the great ads in American political history is a white middle-class couple sitting around the table talking about like how good it used to be when we had like the old healthcare. Now things are bad, man. Like, I wish I could choose my doctor. Oh man, I don't have any choices. Everything's so expensive because of this healthcare reform. So the Harry and Louise ad was basically meant to convey the sense that if this reform passes, your life will be worse. Like, the things that are most important to you in your life, taking care of your children, taking care of your parents in their hour of most dire need of medical care, that's going to be taken away from you if we do this universal health care plan that Bill and Hillary Clinton are proposing. That was what the anti-reform campaign put forward, and I think it's not surprising in some ways that it's one of those like rather have the devil you know than the devil you don't know kind of situations. People were very scared of losing their own health insurance if this large universal health care plan happened and sort of reordered everything. So Clinton's major initiative collapses in 1994. And after that, he just basically gives up on doing anything. in 1994, also the Republicans have a huge, crushing, like, you know, blowout takeover of Congress, House and Senate, under a man called Newt Gingrich from the suburbs of Georgia, like Marietta, that sort of area. Um, Gingrich and his Republican colleagues are advocating the idea that we will have, we will cut social programs, we will cut Medicaid, Medicare, we'll shrink the government, we'll cut taxes, we'll get people off, we'll get government off of people's backs. And, you know, that is basically the Reagan message, but like on steroids now. And so in the politics of the 90s, you really have a showdown between Bill Clinton, on one hand, the Democratic president, and Newt Gingrich, the Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives. And they really stare each other down. The Republicans are not really able to achieve much of their agenda in many respects because people actually like Medicare and Medicaid, and it was very hard to cut those things. But they did get a lot done. For one thing, there was 1996, the Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA. This was overturned by the Supreme Court in 2015, I think. But this was one of the first ever like federal laws that had to do with marriage, which is really something that had been defined by the states prior to that, saying basically marriage is a man and woman. That's it. You know, it's all over. That's it. Like we are very worried about gay marriage, so we're going to tell the entire country, 2 men, 2 women can never get married. Bill Clinton goes along with this because it seems, well, people are very homophobic, and he thinks that that's good for his reelection. The other thing that Clinton does that is extremely important, I mean, he does some other things that are also important, but is welfare reform. And when you see those, you grew up in the South, maybe you didn't, I don't know. You've probably seen the stickers wherever you grew up. You've probably seen the stickers on the back of somebody's pickup truck that say, "Work harder, millions on welfare are depending on you," which is a way of saying, I have to go to fucking work and I hate it, and I have to do this. I have this miserable, horrible life where I have to get up at 5 a.m., go to work, and work really hard, not make much money, and that money is going to support a bunch of lazy people on welfare who are doing nothing. That is kind of the message. That's what the Republicans have been pushing for a long time. And Clinton basically embraces that. He says the era of big government is over, and he wants to change welfare. This is a policy that we talked about that came out of the 1930s, where women, mothers with children who were poor would get, money from the government, essentially a payment to survive, so that they could raise their children. That idea seemed to make sense in the 30s when we had, the thought that like women are mothers and women should be home with their children. And so if a woman is poor and she has a kid, then and the husband dies or runs off with a floozy or is a, drunken wastrel, like that poor helpless woman should have some money to help support her and her child. Once you get to the 90s, especially after the rise of second wave feminism and free market thinking as well, it's like, why are we paying these people? They're lazy. They should go to fucking work. And so, welfare reform passes in 1996. It basically turns what used to be called Aid to Families with Dependent Children, AFDC, into a new program that is extremely limited. You can only get it for a limited time and a certain max of time in your life. So welfare, as Bill Clinton said, welfare as we know it is over. That is the legacy of Bill Clinton. So this whole welfare reform thing. This is part of a bigger constellation of ideas, though. I asked you guys to look at the article by Thomas Frank called The Rise of Market Populism, and also Barbara Ehrenreich and a few other things. But this is really like the 90s are the time when several things happened. A, the Cold War was over. We had beaten communism. Like capitalism, liberal democracy seemed like it had won the war. There was a guy named Francis Fukuyama who said that it was the end of history. Basically, this is it. This is the end point. All the fights and all the dialectic or whatever that led up to this, we've come to the end. Like capitalism, liberal democracy, consumerism. This is the final form of human society. We finally figured it out, and nothing's ever going to change after that. As you know, that's not necessarily the case. But the 90s really were a time of triumphalism for the U.S. They'd won the Cold War. The the capitalist economy seemed to revive when Clinton was in office. You had the development of personal computers and the internet, which led to this thing called the dot-com boom, where there was all this money being invested in tech companies in Silicon Valley. And it was like, look, I mean, obviously, like Bill Gates, they're creating all these awesome products that like are so useful and affordable, and like, why should there be rules? Why should there be regulations? Why should there be limitations? We've shown that like capitalism works really well. So like this is the golden age of capitalism. And what Thomas Frank is talking about in his article is this very strong sense that like capitalism is better than democracy, or capitalism is real democracy. What Frank is saying is that people began to believe that like I vote with my money. I vote with my feet. Like, if I want Red Sox or Green Sox, I buy Red Sox, and then the market creates more Red Sox, like or Green Sox or whatever. The market actually is more democratic than voting or the political system. That is what Thomas Frank is describing. Of course, he doesn't think this is a good idea, but he's trying to describe what the ethos of the age is, which really is that, the free market is the true form of democracy. And Clinton is in power in large part because he reconciles himself with this idea, and he makes a lot of concessions to the Republicans on social issues and economic issues. So, to close this out, I asked you guys to look at the song by Bruce Springsteen, which is also covered by Rage Against the Machine a few years later. Rage Against the Machine is, very obviously like typical thing. It's a neo-Marxist metal hip-hop band. I mean, those are a dime a dozen, right? They're very left-wing. And they cover the song. But Bruce Springsteen put this out in 1995, and I think it's very interesting to look at this in light of like the cultural and economic changes of the 80s and 90s. So in the song Ghost of Tom Joad, Bruce Springsteen is painting a picture of what it means to be on the margins, what it means to be an illegal, or I should say undocumented immigrant, in the shadows, desperately trying to survive in this new America. So in the song he says, men walking along the railroad tracks, going someplace there's no going back. Highway patrol choppers coming up over the ridge, hot soup on a campfire under the bridge, shelter lines stretching around the corner. Welcome to the new world order. Families sleeping in the cars in the Southwest, no home, no job, no peace, no rest. Well, the highway is alive tonight, but nobody's kidding nobody about where it goes. I'm sitting down here in the campfire light, searching for the ghost of Tom Joad. So what Springsteen is saying here is that, like, undocumented immigrants in the Southwest, largely from Mexico and Central America, were analogous to Tom Joad, who was the main character in The Grapes of Wrath back in the 1930s. They were the, dispossessed, impoverished farmers in that story, in that novel, in that film. Tom Joad, the Joad family represented the poor white people of the 30s who lost everything in the Depression and had to embark for the West to California to try to find any way to survive, he's saying it's the ghost of Tom Joad. So that's what's happening to people who are the most marginalized and the most sort of obscured by society. So, he says, welcome to the New World Order. Uh, this whole idea of the free market, Barbara Ehrenreich talks about it in Nickel and Dime too, what it means to be a low-wage worker in this deregulated economy, and basically like how hard it is to survive, like to just like put it together. This is a great time for people in some ways because unemployment is low. There's even a bit of wage growth in the 1990s, which had not happened for a long time. Like people are truly making more money. Wage earners, workers, like actually like making a little bit more. But if you're at the bottom of the totem pole, if you work at Burger King or you're a farm worker or you clean people's houses, things are really hard. You don't have health care. If you're undocumented, you are a non-person in some ways, and that's the New World Order. We will find that by the end of the 90s and 2000, it seems like it's the great, celebratory party of capitalism and democracy, and then it all kind of blows up. We have the events of, first of all, we have the end of the dot-com boom, which happens in 2000. Like, people were investing in things like icecubes.com because it seemed like you could just throw any money at any tech idea and it would make you money. But then that got so big and it fell apart. So that's 2000. And then in 2001, you have 9/11, the terrorist attacks on New York and Washington that really signal that Fukuyama was not right. History is not over. There's not just one model of society or one ideology. It's extremely clear on September 11th that this whole argument's not over and things are going to happen and it's going to be rough. Most of the early 21st century has been pretty rough. We're going to talk about that next time in the episode called High Water Everywhere, which is the world we're living in. All right. Thank you. Have a good one.